A thread by Carlos Osuita. Here's your happy thought for the weekend. I live in SoCal. The radio talk shows tend to have free for all audience call ins. Guess what? It was all Democrats saying they were going to vote for Trump. Why? Drum roll. The rioting. That was the last straw. I'll quote an old guy. I've been a good boy, been a good Democrat, but I can't do it anymore. I'm voting for Trump. Fuck the Democrats. The second worst mistake the Democrats ever made was turning brown shirts loose on the country. The worst mistake, of course, was supporting the Confederates during the Civil War. This is pretty darn close. The brown shirts are victimizing Democrats. How does that help the Democrats? The Democrats say that the riots are Trump's fault for sending in the feds. This is stupid on so many levels. The feds are protecting federal property. That's all. Therefore, the Democrats are saying that protecting property causes riots. And besides, the riots started 2 days after George Floyd died. The Democrats have adopted the sock gnome theory for how to win elections. Sock gnomes, according to South Park, steal one of your socks from the dryer. Their goal is to make tons of money. When asked to explain how the heck they'll do it, they show the 3 steps. 1, steal 1 sock from each dryer in the world. 2, question mark. 3, be rich. See, they say, we've got it mostly figured out. All we need to do is find an answer to step number 2 and we'll be in business. Here's the Democrats' plan for winning the election. 1, unleash violent brown shirts on Democrat cities and vehemently support them. 2, question mark. 3, win the election. Life imitates South Park. Who knew Democrats would use South Park as an instructional film? And the cognitive rigidity of leftists prevents them from modifying their approach. All Trump's Judas goats have to do is cheer on the mayhem. Just stick with it. People are afraid to admit it, but they support you. I get messages all the time expressing total solidarity with burning down their cities and turning every cultural event into a re-education session. We got it made. A spree killer is a person who goes from place to place, murdering as many strangers as possible before being stopped. All of them are mentally ill, as are all serial killers and mass shooters. Antifa are mentally ill, not the leaders. The foot soldiers of Antifa are Jack Spratt and his nameless wife. The original brown shirts, Sturmabteilung, or SA, were run by World War I shock troops. Ernst Röhm's face was heavily scarred from combat. Shock troops were the best in the Imperial German Army. What they did was separate into squads and race through enemy lines, carry out the mission, and get back home. Link in the description to an example of the activities of a shock troop. Those guys with their period weapons would not give modern day special forces a run for their money. For one thing, people 100 years ago were much stronger and had much more endurance. They walked everywhere and did everything by hand. The only reason the Nazi brown shirts were taken over by Hitler was that all the leaders were killed on the night of the long knives. By that time, the average brown shirt was a low IQ street brawler. Without leaders, they were done for. The brown shirts outnumbered the German army 20-1. Antifa and BLM are a tiny minority of the population. The Democrats started a war they can't win. Besides, the tactics are pushing away all sane Democrats. The US in 2020 isn't Germany in 1933. The Democrats are going for one of the classic forms of authoritarianism. There are only a few factors that allow a country to be totalitarian. These don't all exist simultaneously, but it can be one or more than one. 1. The population is racially or ethnically homogeneous. 2. The country has a long history of absolutism. 3. A racial, ethnic, or religious minority traditionally rules over a racial, ethnic, or religious majority. 4. A country is conquered and absolutism is imposed. The Democrats are going for number 3. A racial, ethnic, or religious minority traditionally rules over a racial, ethnic, or religious majority. The religion is leftism. Well, do you see the problem? It's too late to impose this. It has to go back centuries. The minority is well educated, wealthy, and in control of the purse strings. It keeps the majority stupid, poor, and terrorized. The only way to make a living is to serve in the internal security forces of the minority. The Democrats are off their rockers in one lethal way. They refuse to take into account the reality on the ground and the ability of Trump to thwart them. Do you know what the hottest selling items are right now? RVs, boats, tents, guns, and ammunition. Is that American or what? You can't impose a third world dictatorship on Americans. Apparently, you can do it in leftist cities, but too many leftists don't see themselves as Americans anyway. I saw a guy all by himself in a huge parking lot talking on his cell phone. I was sitting in an adjacent lot, eating my one meal of the day. Someone driving by actually came off the street, pulled into the lot, parked, got out of the car, and went over to the guy. A blonde, 40-ish woman. He was a 30-ish black man. I rolled down my window. She stopped 6 feet away from him and screeched like a pterodactyl. Why aren't you wearing a mask? You're supposed to be wearing a mask. Without pausing in his conversation, he shot her the finger, turned his back, and continued walking around. She got back in her car and left. I rolled down my window and shouted, "Good for you!" He gave me a thumbs up and got back to his call. See? Easy peasy. Trump 2020 landslide victory. Count on it.